All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Um, can I ask that one of you just help us by by indicating whether or not you can hear me just fine? And also, if you
Yes,
can.
sir.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Yeah. So I wanted to give you a heads up. This week we are planning to have our. I want us to have our presentations, and I'm trying to avoid us using the lecture slot because we can't afford to do that. So you want to prepare on. I'll reach out to the course reps here. I would like for us to attempt to do this on. So certainly we're having a session on Tuesday early in the morning. So that's 7. And then so I'm okay, not Tuesday actually. I don't want to. It's likely going to be Wednesday, right? Now, if it's Wednesday, I haven't confirmed with the venue or something, but I want us to use the Michael K. Lecture Theatre or something. If I'm unable to secure the venue, a large venue, we are definitely going to start doing this during the 11 to 12 hour slot. Okay, and then we'll continue off later in the afternoon, perhaps, yeah, in the late afternoon actually. So I want to prepare. This is the proposal presentations. Yeah. Anyway, it's going to be a bit tricky here, but on with it anyway. And then the assignment. The assignment hasn't been explicit on the Moodle yet, but I don't know if I have or I haven't. I don't think I have yet. But I gave you a heads up here. So I'm going to open it up, I think on Monday or something. But the expectation is we've already started working towards collecting this data here. We're trying to make sure that you collect your data this coming week, the entire week, so that you also start doing the analysis. So what you'll notice is that I will probably have another assignment open right about the same time, which is going to speak to data analysis, which we're yet to cover something. I'm hoping we're going to finalize this in good time for you to do the final presentations. I think we are actually. I will insist that we do. All right. So on with it, everybody. So we're going to continue our discussion. Now, a reminder that when we last met, I believe we started we were looking at interview sessions, right? So hopefully everybody has got into a stage where they understand what interviews are all about. Nothing too difficult. I think what's important is deciding, right? Deciding on whether you're going to use structured interviews, right? In essence, it's like a verbal questionnaire, or if you're going to use the semi-structured interview guide, which is typically quite common, or if you would find yourself leveraging what we introduced as unstructured interviews, right? But all the while, we had a discussion of the broad categories of interviews. It turns out you can do interviews in a number of variety of ways. You can conduct face-to-face interviews. You can conduct them via the telephone. You can do an email interview, right? You can use instant messaging platforms like WhatsApp, for instance, or indeed video conferencing platforms or software like what we're doing right now, right? So you schedule an interview with Lighton, if you want to interview Lighton, and then you tell him, we're going to send you a Google Meet link or a Zoom link for the interview. And then boom, you do the interview like that. And all the while, we highlighted the advantages and disadvantages of all of these different interview strategies, right? Or ways of conducting interviews. So today, I would like for us to continue our discussion by touching on yet another important measurement instrument as it relates to research. These are called observation, right? I'm not sure if it's your group. I think it is your group. I told you that at some point we had a fourth year come through to conduct interviews. So what she did, I don't know if it was Mavis or if it was Tofai or Shembekezo, what she did or what he did was he sat somewhere at the back and he was busy taking notes, taking down notes as it relates to what he or she was observing in the class itself, right? At some point last year, I believe it was it before last year, I worked with a group of fourth year students who were camped at UTH, right? So they were at UTH, and what they were doing is they were trying to understand exactly how examinations in the Department of Radiology are conducted. So when you have a client who needs to have a chest X-ray taken, for instance, or you need to generate a CT scan or something after scanning them, the question is, what sort of workflow do they go through? You know, and these students were able to determine that, you know, everything starts with a general practitioner who fills out a request form. The request form is sent to the Department of Radiology. So patients who queue up or something, you know, they'll make payment in some instances. If they're under NEMA, they'll have to queue up somewhere. If they're paying cash, they're processed differently and all those things, right? It turns out that all of these different instances are classic examples of observations. So this notion that you can have a researcher embed themselves in a real-world setting in order to have an in-depth understanding of what is going on. They're collecting data, but collecting data in a rather bizarre manner here, right? If you compare this with using a questionnaire and an interview, right? You're sitting there and you're observing people. Anyway, so motivate for this, we're saying that in certain instances, you know, it may be difficult for you to find out exactly what is going on in a particular environment, right? So what you would have to do, especially in instances where complex tasks being performed, what you would have to do is you'd have to conduct observations. You know, you go into this environment, you embed yourself in this environment, and then you observe people in their natural habitat. So really, observations involve the systematic viewing, is key here, right? Recording, description, and interpretation of people's behavior in their natural settings. In other words, what we're saying is, if you're working on a research problem and you identify observations as a potential measurement instrument, what you're going to have to do is you have to embed yourself in this environment where your potential participants are located, and then you'll be viewing, right? Observing them, recording what is happening, so that afterwards you can describe what you saw and ultimately interpret people's behavior. In essence, what you begin to notice here is typically, not all the time, but typically you'll be observing people's behavior. However, you know, you want to be very careful here, right? In as much as, for the most part, you collect data from human participants. In some instances, you can conduct observations by not really viewing people, right? You can be viewing maybe animals, lab rats, right? You give them some medication, some trial medication, and then you're observing them, is it? Trying to record or to view how they're behaving after that medication, the trial medication has been administered. Alternatively, it's possible that maybe you may be conducting a study with rats, is it? And then you're saying you want to observe vehicles, right? As they're driving along the greatest road, because, and this is I just randomly thought about this. A lot of UNZA students that are abashed, as they're attempting to cross the greatest road, is it? So what you're going to do is, as part of the study, to understand why this happens, you say, we're going to observe vehicles driving along the greatest road, somewhere close to UNZA, on various points of the road where pedestrians will cross, right? So maybe marshlands, I don't know if it's going to be somewhere near that East Park bus stop or something. So what you'll be doing is you'll be observing vehicles, is it? And maybe what you'll be observing specifically is maybe the speed at which the vehicles are being driven, right? I'm trying to highlight the fact that you just don't observe people, right? You can be observing other things here. What is crucial is to appreciate the fact that as part of observations, when you're using an observation as a measurement instrument, you are viewing and recording. Okay, some key characteristics here is we see that observations will provide data on what, I want to say participants, not people here, on what participants actually do, right? And in terms of the types of observations, it becomes important for us to make a distinction. This is from the classic Sanders et al., by the way. You have so-called participant observations and structured observations, right? For participant observations, what happens is the researcher becomes part of the group that they're studying, right? To gain an in-depth inside understanding. So in essence, you actively participate in whatever is happening, whatever you want to observe. Perhaps if you were observing vehicles driving along Greatest Road, maybe instead of just sitting on the flyover bridge there, right, the pedestrian overpass, or sitting somewhere at Marshlands bus stop, you'll be driving a vehicle, right? And you're observing, like right along Greatest Road. You're driving in the same direction as the vehicles and you're observing what is happening like that. Maybe doing pest maneuvers and all those things, right? Anyway, and you notice here that the approach typically would be qualitative, it's immersive, and long form, right, or long term. Okay, the goal, participant observation, is to understand a group's culture, norms, and meaning from the inside. So you're part of them or something. And we see here that the way that you are recording, right, is you typically would use field notes, right? This is a detailed field note. So you're writing down things using your field notes. So you'll have detailed written accounts of whatever you're observing, in essence. In this day and age, maybe part of what you can do is you can leverage motion pictures. You take still photos of what is happening, maybe even video footage, right? Assuming you have gotten permission, right? And then with structured observations, what the researcher would be doing, or what you'd be doing, is you'd be systematically observing and you are coding behaviors according to a predefined checklist, a schedule. So you prepare a checklist that outlines what specific things you're going to be looking at here. And you begin to notice that it's like a quantitative approach, right? Because the checklist will be applied to all of these different entities that you're observing. Okay? The goal here is typically to count the frequencies and duration of specific behaviors. So it's like, I want to observe how students enrolled in LIS 2034 actually behave in class, right? How many students are actually taking down notes when we have an in-classroom session, for instance? On average, how many students actually ask questions, right? I'm quantifying, so it's typically to be quantitative kind of approach here. And we see here that the instrument, the specific instrument, the thing that you're using to collect data would be a coding schedule, right? Or an observation checklist. I have an example of an observation checklist towards the end here. So something like this, right? Something like this. So you create something like this, is it? Right? If you want to observe how students collaborate in our Odell laboratory, which has been defunct for some time now, you'd create an observation checklist like this, right? And all the while as you're making observations, you're restricting your documentation to this observation checklist. Anyways, right? So structured observations, participant observations, and structured observations, right? Now, it becomes important for us to appreciate the levels of involvement, is it? Especially in instances where you're embedding yourself as part of the group. So let's say, back to the example of my students who are trying to understand how registration is done. I mean, yeah, how attendance is done in LIS 2034, these other courses. What they're doing is they're embedding themselves within you, right, as a group, right? I mean, I just mentioned they sit at the back here, but it turns out that the level of involvement is varied, right? You know, so it's dependent on whether you're really immersed, you immerse yourself within the group, or you're detached completely within the group, right? So when you choose, what we're saying is when you choose participant observation, which is here, yeah, it becomes important for you to explicitly decide on your level of involvement as an observer, right? So there's a range of options that you have here, and they're all determine your relationship with these entities that you're observing or studying. Okay. Incidentally, this would apply in instances where the observation involves you're observing human beings, is it? Like you can't say you're going to be a complete observer or a complete participant if you're observing lab rats, is it? I mean, you can't magically turn into a lab rat, if you will. So it turns out that there are 4 classic roles on the spectrum that we're talking about, right? You can be a complete participant. You can be a participant observer. You can be an observer as a participant, or you can be a complete observer. This is making sense here, right? So in the first one, where we're looking at complete participant, in other words, here we are saying that you're fully immersed, right? It's almost like if one of you was conducting the study of attendance for LIS 2034, you'd actually be actively participating in activities that are happening in LIS 2034. And in most instances, actually, the people may not know that you're actually collecting data, is it? You're immersing yourself fully. Whatever activities are happening, you are actively participating, but at the same time, you are actually making observations or you're collecting data, right? So complete participant, right? And really what we're saying is that as a researcher, you typically go undercover or something, and your identity would typically be concealed from the group. So the group will not know that you are actually collecting data. And the thinking behind that is you wouldn't want to, because sometimes when people have been told that, you know, there's a study that is happening and this is what's happening, their behavior may be tailored towards that, right? They'll change their behavior. So to avoid that, you immerse yourself completely. So it's complete participant. And you fully participate, right? In whatever the group you're observing is doing. If you are studying thieves here, it's a weird thing here, but if you're studying junkies, then you'd also become a partial junkie or something like that, right? Although I don't think anybody would want to experiment with designer drugs, but you get the point, right? Anyways, I have an analogy here. I'm guessing it would be something like an uncover, you know, journalist or a mystery shopper or something like that, right? A ton of examples, really, but you get the point. Now, in terms of characteristics here, you notice that there's full immersion and participation, is it? You embed yourself in this environment you're studying, right? And you're actively participating in whatever is going on. Your identity is going to be hidden as a researcher, right? There's an example here, right? A very well example. Hopefully you'll be able to get the point here. So, you know, a researcher gets a job in a software company's call center to study their informal and documented troubleshooting techniques, right? Without telling their colleagues that they're conducting research. So it's like, maybe it's Airtel, right? You want to understand how these call center agents actually operate, is it? So you yourself, maybe you get in there and you're introduced as a new call center agent or something like that, right? In fact, you know that it's like there's a common TV show here. I think they call it, I don't know if you've seen this, but it's called, I've seen a couple of things. It's called Undercover Boss or something like that, right? Where the owner of the company pretends like they pretend like they're a new hire or something, and then they try to observe other employees, and then, you know, at the end they'll gift them maybe with money and all those things. Anyway, it's like undercover boss. Anyways, I guess, I don't know. So the major challenges, though, is if you think about it, right, as a complete participant here, it's like there are ethical concerns here, is it? The fact that you're not telling these people that you're conducting research would seemingly appear to be a deceptive tactic here, right? In fact, you notice that this raises a number of interesting, you know, ethical considerations here, but you notice that there's nothing like getting informed consent, is it, from them? Because the moment you tell them to consent to be studied or something, then you're giving things away here, right? So in some instances, what you notice, depending on the sensitive nature of what is happening, some entities will not allow you to, they'll not give you approval to conduct this sort of study, especially if it's a sensitive area, if you will. You know, there's also the risk here, right, of you becoming so involved because you're immersing yourself in this environment. You become so involved that, you know, you lose your objectivity, is it? Ideally, when you're conducting research, it's supposed to be objective like that. And then you notice here that it becomes difficult for you to collect data, right? You're immersing yourself in this environment. At the same time, you're supposed to be taking field notes, is it? Detailed field notes. So the question is, I mean, how do you go undercover and at the same time taking field notes? Like that? So it becomes difficult from a practical standpoint to actually do this. So that's the first row, right? Where you are a complete participant. Notice we're discussing this spectrum, is it? Right? Left to right. And then the row number 2 is you are a participant as an observer, right? Participant observer. And the idea here is that the researcher is full and active member of the group. However, in this particular case, the group is aware that there's a study being conducted, right? Your primary role is still a participant, but you're actively participating. I did this myself when I was doing my doctoral studies. I conducted observations. I conducted observations. I believe it's this year, and this is documented in. You probably want to Google up my doctoral thesis here. This was documented as not chapter 2 here. It was documented in not expert interviews here, but how was that? Here, right? In my study 3 here, where I got approval, obviously, to conduct observations at the University of Cape Town, and I identified specific courses. So I would sit in a statistics course, right, from start to finish. I sat in there. These are large classes, right? I would sit and act like I was a member of the people in class. And thankfully enough, because it's a large class, people wouldn't really. I was introduced, obviously, but at the same time, I don't think I was disturbing what was happening in the class, right? In some instances, I would raise up my hand and ask questions, right? So this is an alternative to a complete participant, is it? A participant as an observer. There's full immersion and participation still. However, your identity is known, right? So it's almost like it's exactly like a complete participant, with the exception that your identity in this particular case is known. Again, I have an example here where, you have the librarian who's studying information seeking, habits of their fellow librarians, right? So they're participating fully in all staff duties and, also openly take notes during meetings and conduct informal interviews for their research project. But they're observing their colleagues. So you work in the same environment, so they know what is happening. Some challenges here is there's observer effect here. So because people know that you're observing them, they will change their behavior. You understand? They are likely to change their behavior. There's also the issue of role duality. So it becomes difficult to balance being a person who's fully participating in those activities and also performing your role as a researcher, right? Collecting the data, at least during the period when you're collecting the data anyway. Yeah. So that's role number 2, participant as observer. And then you have the observer as participant, right? So in this particular case, the researcher's role is primarily to observe, right? And them participating in the activities that are being performed by the people they're observing may be optional in this particular case, right? So essentially you only do those things so that people are not really apprehensive of your presence, if that makes sense. Again, your identity will be known here. And if you look at example, the characteristics we're looking at for row number 3 here, your observation is the main focus, is it? But participation is secondary. Whereas in row number 2, where your participant is an observer, you have got to maintain both roles. Both are important. Okay. However, similar to the participant as observer, role, we see that your identity and your purpose will be known as well. So you'll be introduced, for instance, or you explicitly tell the people you're observing about what is happening. Again, I have an example here. Let's say you're studying IT help desk functions, right? Because maybe there's a report that tickets, are not addressed on time. This is CICT here. People are complaining. We keep on sending queries, but they're not addressed by CICT. Right? So what you do is you embed yourself in that sort of environment. We see here that if you think about the strengths, right, of this particular role here, there's a good balance between gaining insight into what is happening and also maintaining your outside objectivity, because you're prioritizing being the observer, is it? The research participation is secondary. So this makes it relatively easier for you to take the detailed notes that you need to draw conclusions or to interpret your findings. Role number 4 is where you are a complete observer, right? So in this particular case, you are just observing what is happening. You're not participating in anything that is going on. Like my students, when they went to, wait a minute, when they went to UTH, they were actually I want to say complete participants, especially when they were observing what happens with NEMA patients and stuff. In fact, what they were doing, if you read up on their work, what they were doing is they were actually helping out with what those clerks do. So actually help out, like filling out the register and all those things. These details are available in this paper, which was, this report, which was an explicit documentation of this here. It's actually 2 years ago. It's been a while here. I didn't notice that. I don't know if they forgotten here. It's been 2 years now, but I don't know if they were complete observers or something. They outlined the methodology somewhere here, right? So if you notice here, a series of 8 observations took place during this period here, right? And what were they doing here? We observed different key stakeholders at various workflow points, including data entry clerks, right? Cashiers, NEMA officers, right? Referring physicians. This was exciting. Anyway, so there's that, right? Where you're a complete observer. I wanted to give that as an example of complete observer, but they were actually participant. In fact, they were complete participants, except when they were observing radiographers. Radiologists and radiographers, yeah. Anyways, so role number 4, in essence, is a complete observer, right? This is characteristic of what my students are doing. In one of the sessions we had, they came and sat at the back. In fact, that's what they do. That's what they did with my 2 other courses, right? In CSC 4792, they'll come and sit at the back. right? In ICT 3020, Mavis came through and she sat at the back, and I introduced Mavis, right? I told my students, my third-year students, Mavis is a fourth-year student who's working on a capstone project. She's here to collect data. She's conducting observations, and so she sat at the back so that she couldn't, disrupt what was going on. Anyways, so in terms of key characteristics, you notice that you don't participate in activities being performed by the people you're observing, right? It can be overt, right? Or covert. So in some instances, people know, in some other instances, they may not know. So if let's say they come to observe a class that they haven't observed yet, I may not tell the students that they're there to collect data, right? They'll just see, in fact, for large classes, they won't even know that that person is not part of the group, right? Anyways, so it can be both overt and covert, like that, right? So an example of complete this role, the complete observer, would be as an information science example. So a researcher conducting a usability study by watching students interact with a new website, right? Using a screen sharing software. Yeah. So as the people are using that piece of software, you're using the screen sharing software to observe how they're interacting with the software. So the researcher doesn't really need to interact with the users as they're performing that task, right? Anyways, and then I thought I would just wrap up by our discussion of observations, wrap up by showcasing an example of a structured observation checklist. Remember, we mentioned that there are two types of observations. You have participant observations and structured observations. We said that with structured observations, the specific instrument that you use is you prepare some observation checklist. This is an example of an observation checklist. Typically, because you'd be observing, right? You're conducting observations over various days, perhaps. What you need to do is you take a note of when this was done and the time and all those things, right? And this particular example, right? I'm observing students, the way students collaborate in computer lab, right? And I've identified key aspects of my checklist, right? Things, verbal-oriented tasks, ideally, how they're using specific software tools, and things that they're doing that have nothing to do with collaboration. So if you're in the lab, for instance, and specific things that I would be checking for would be how many people would be asking, as they're collaborating, would be asking help or questions to their teammate, people they're collaborating with. So I keep a note, and then I write down, I keep a tally, I'm counting, because this would be quantitative, and then at the same time, I'm taking important notes, right? Maybe indicating that I see that on average, most of the questions that the verbal questions being asked are related to this particular theme or something like that. And then, again, another aspect of category A here, like verbal tasks, would be explaining a concept or debating a design choice. This is just a random example. I'm just trying to showcase to say, if you are interested in a topic like this, right? These are some of the items that you would add in your observation checklist. This is obviously dependent on the type of research question you are handling, right? For instance, if I was wanting to use this structured observation checklist to monitor vehicles along Greatest Road, maybe one of the things I would do is I would say type of vehicles or something, Hilux, sedans, and all those things, and public service vehicles and buses, right? I would have a category tied to that, and then I would have a category tied to maybe speed, right? Or changing lanes and all those things. I don't know. Anyway, so just an example of an observation checklist, and you notice here that there's a column that allows you to capture quantitative data, right? It's a tally, in essence, a count, Anyways, hope this makes sense for participant observations. You rarely would use this. depends anyway on the type, but usually in most instances, unless if you really want to gain an in-depth understanding of whatever topic you're working towards, then you conduct observations. In most instances, you wouldn't really do this per se. I'm just trying to think. There's a group that is looking at sanitation, on campus. Maybe if you are doing this over a period of 1 year or 2 years or something, you'd say all the things we're going to do is we're going to go around, right, and observe, to what extent people litter on campus and all those things. I don't know, or we're going to observe, how students react to issues to do with sanitation, right? When there's water coming in from the restrooms and all those weird things. I don't know. Anyways, so there's observations, and then we see that you can actually leverage what we are calling secondary data, right? So secondary data is a measurement instrument. So this notion that you can latch on to data that has already been collected as part of a separate research study and use that as a basis, right, to draw conclusions. So we're defining secondary data as data that was originally collected by someone else or a different researcher for a different purpose. So your instrument is not it's not a tool you create, but it's a systematic process for searching, evaluating, and compiling this existing information. It's like if you are conducting a study on unhealthy lifestyle in Zambia. Yeah, that's a good one. Unhealthy lifestyle in Zambia. What you would do is you would say, we are going to use the Zambia Demographic Household Survey, right? We are going to use maybe not the Zambia Demographic Household Survey here, but we're going to use the STEP survey from 2018, right? Your interest is to study unhealthy lifestyle, right? That leads to non-communicable diseases. Like why are people having a lot of heart attacks and strokes? And you do your systematic review and you realize it's because of unhealthy lifestyles, like smoking and, consuming copious amounts of alcohol or liquor, you're messing up your liver like that, right? Or leading sedentary lifestyles, right? You're coming from the second floor, you want to get into the lift, right? Instead of walking down the staircase or something like that, So what you can do is you can go through detailed data that was captured as part of this study, a STEP survey, for instance, right? And then you pay particular attention to aspects of this survey that captured these factors associated with non-communicable diseases, is it? So tobacco smoke, for instance, yeah, alcohol, consumption of salt, KFC, and all this stuff that you guys like consuming, right? And healthy stuff here. But so the key thing here is you're leveraging secondary data. And so somebody else would have already conducted interviews or they used a questionnaire to collect data. And so what you do is you're getting access to this raw data that was compiled. This is very, very common, actually. Quite common to use secondary data, right? Anyways, a few challenges here, right? We need to take into account because ultimately, right, when you're answering a research question, you go through a systematic evaluation exercise, right? Can I use interviews? Can I use a questionnaire? Can I use secondary data to just answer my research question? The challenge with secondary data, if you do decide to choose it, that the reason why the data was captured may not be a close match with your research question or a specific objective. So you may not be able to capture the other nuances associated with your specific objective because you are relying on data that was collected for a completely different purpose. So in some instances, maybe you may have to tweak your specific objective. And if it's not an important aspect of your research, you can get away with that. You can get away with that. We did this ourselves, as part of our enterprise medical imaging in Zambia project. Myself and Dr. Ernest Obizulu, analyzed a series of documents. When was that? Wow, here, but we analyzed a series of documents, right? So we used secondary data here. We're looking at retrospective reports. I think we mentioned this in this paper here. Yeah. If you read this paper, I do encourage you to read it at your own time. There's mention. There's mention of the things that we did. This is the one here. We're going through reports. Yeah, this is the one. So we use secondary data for some of the things we're doing. Like, here we go, right? Look at this. Part of what we have in our paper, right, is we have an analysis of types of health facilities in Zambia, right? But we didn't go around here and conduct an interview with people, say, in Eastern Province, with the district, I don't know, health officers or whatever they're called here. Can you tell us the number of hospitals you have and the types? No. What did we do? We went to the Ministry of Health website and we used the master facility list, right? There's a master facility list. I still remember here. Noted that one. Master facility list, and then we extracted information from here. Oh, from here. No, not here. Master facility from Ministry of Health, not Ministry of Fisheries and Livestock, MFL, but we went here, we extracted data about all of the health facilities in Zambia, and then we did our analysis like that. And so secondary data. I'm glad I remembered about this. Classic example of secondary data. There's more secondary data we used here. Like if you look at this, radiological annual returns, what we did was we got details of all the quarterly reports for this particular year, and then we summarized them and embedded them into, as we were drafting this paper here. So the analysis was based on secondary data. Most of what we did actually here, because we were conducting a situation analysis, involved us making use of secondary data. Okay. Anyway, so the original purpose may not match your needs, but also access may be difficult or costly. So most of the raw data, because what you'll be doing if you are, say, making use of, like we did here, you want reports compiled by the ministry. If Dr. Zulu was not a part of this study, it would have been incredibly difficult. I mean, we got ethical clearance and stuff, but because he had the knowledge of who compiles this sort of information and how it's compiled, it was relatively easy for us to gain access to this information. But that's not generally the case, right? It's difficult. I remember this one time we had to abandon a project I was working on with 2 of my colleagues. I don't know if they still remember here. When I initially just joined the UNZA, so he's now professor, I guess, with Professor Hangoma and Dr. Grieve Chelwa, right? We wanted to, they were interested in analyzing the impact of FISP, right? And so one of the things we needed to do is we needed to gain access to what are called shape files, right? Now these files, the shape files are compiled by Zambia Statistical Agency. So we went to Zambia Statistical Agency, and we had a hard time getting access to those files, and we just abandoned that. We just abandoned that. And in fact, I probably still have some of the data that I was supposed to have used. I don't know if I have this. I have this. I hope not. Not really. I really wanted to showcase some of the data here. They had already compiled. Or they'd already identified some additional data sets, but there was important information that we also needed, right? from Zambia Statistical Agency. But because this information is closed off, right, access was difficult, we had to abandon. So we never got to do that. I'm trying to see if I can find this information. It may just, FISP is political like that, right? The certain school of thought that thinks it's not effective, you're just dumping money, right? Into this hole that you can fill up here, FISP. Let me just see if I can find the secondary data. I know. I don't know why this is. I'm just trying to see if I can find the FISP. I don't know. I can't even find it. I don't know what's happening here. May have to upgrade this. But yeah, there we go. It's FISP paper. Thank you. It's here actually. It's shared. So we had access to this data here. You know, God, these people are still. I should remind them, right? They're still here. It was a long time ago. If you check the dates, they're still here. Peter and myself, and then there's Griff here. I don't know if they. This was in 2018, so a long time ago. I should remind them, try and find out if they're still interested in this. So anyway, I thought I would mention that the fact that we had trouble, right, getting access to. We had trouble getting access to the secondary data, right? So this can be a hindrance, by the way. Anyways, so there's that. And what's happening here. And then we're saying that the data may not be summarized in a way that the data may be summarized in a way that doesn't work for you, especially because if I go back to the example of the step survey, you can actually you can use the data as it appears in this. There are two main ways, right? In this same report, right? Or alternatively, you can reach out to the Ministry of Health and tell them, I want you to give me the raw data that was collected using this questionnaire, right? You see this? I want you to give me the raw data because this report was compiled using information captured using this questionnaire, if you notice. Now, it turns out that getting access to this raw data sometimes may be difficult. And so what you do is, in fact, impossible, I want to argue, right? Especially in Zambia. So what you do instead is you say, I'm just going to use the information as it appears in this same report. Now, the problem with this is that information has already been aggregated or summarized. It may have been summarized in a manner that is not consistent with how you want to analyze data. And the example I give here is perhaps the age ranges. Maybe you want these age ranges to not be 18 to 29. Maybe you want to analyze them from 18 to 25 and then 25 to 30 or something. You can't, right? With this sort of data because this is already summarized using these age ranges. So it poses a challenge like that. Okay? And then also, if you're looking at, this is a big one here. I don't know if this applies, but this was done in 2017, right? This report. Observe. 8 years ago. Now, because this was done 8 years ago, maybe some things would have changed. Imagine a situation where in 2017, when data was being collected, this is not the case, but we had nine provinces, right? 9 provinces. And then you want to analyze the data in 2025, right? When we have 10 provinces. Unfortunately, the data is aggregated using, it would have been aggregated using 9 provinces and not the 10 provinces. So it'd be difficult like that. Hope that example kind of helps here. So the challenges, right? But also, we see here that you don't have control over the data quality. You know, how do you know that this data was collected so systematically that it's reliable? It's difficult, right? Because you didn't participate in this study. So you're at the mercy of whoever collected this data. If you are fabricating the results, then obviously your interpretation is going to be wrong as well. You know, so all these are things that you'd have to take into account. And really, this is a reason why, in most instances, you'd use secondary data when you're using information maybe that was compiled by trusted entities like government. So, I mean, you could safely trust information that is presented in this report, is it? Not something that was done by maybe a fourth-year student. You say, I'm going to use the survey results compiled by a group that was working on projects in LIS 2034 last year. I wouldn't do that myself. Anyways, so in terms of the types of secondary data, right, we see that we have survey secondary data, right? So you go to Zambia Statistical Agency and you tell them, give me access to survey results, right, when you're conducting census. You also have documentary secondary data. This is like textual and non-textual data that exists in documents, right? So if you conduct like a document analysis or something, so your interest here would be, I want to analyze quarterly reports by the University of Zambia because I'm trying to understand how research is conducted in higher education institutions. So you go to UNZA and you ask for quarterly reports generated by UNZA. These are compiled religiously. You go to Mungushi University, you go to Zikas University, and you ask for these annual reports, right? So you're going through, reports in essence, documents. Or you can have multiple sources, is it? You know, so sources coming in from different sort of places here. So survey data together with reports that have been compiled or minutes or something, or you're extracting information from the website and all those things, right? You can have multiple sources of data, ideally. What is important though, irrespective of whether you are leveraging survey, secondary data, documentary data, or multiple sources, is you've got to systematically evaluate whether you can actually apply or use that secondary data in your research. And typically, it's advisable that you go through a three-stage process, right? Where you start off by, first of all, ascertaining the data required. Yeah. So you have this research problem. What sort of data attributes, what sort of data do you need for you to answer a research question, right? And then the next stage is you establish the availability, right? And sourcing of that data. So is there a place in Zambia government website, or is there a government department that has collected data related to what you want, right? Afterwards, once you identify, you establish the availability of the data, you've got to evaluate it, right? Is the data suitable? Is this data in here, is it suitable for the study that I'm wanting to conduct, for instance, in the STEP survey, right? So you typically be assessing the validity and reliability of the data, really. I have some example here. Let's say you have a research question, right? Where, how has the adoption of information and communication technologies in Zambian household changed between 2025 and 2022? Yeah, it's like, do we see a noticeable change in the way that people use ICTs when we compare results from 2015 and 2022? You do not have to ask, you don't have to create a questionnaire to answer this question. What you can do is you can find the reports that will compile this sort of information. In fact, what I would do is I wouldn't even go to Zambia Statistical Agency, although I was just being hypothetical here. The correct place to go to is, ladies and gentlemen, you go to Z.ICTA, right? I'll say Z.ICTA, they have reports, they compile reports, right? They compile reports on the ICT sector. So how many people use mobile devices and stuff? This, yeah? These annual reports here is what you would be after here. So you'd be comparing, but why? You'd be comparing, in fact, in some instances, they actually have raw data, actually. They have, I think if you do a mobile tracing or something, there's a dedicated subdomain, I think. I remember I've downloaded CSV files also. I don't know. Maybe it's, I think it's the same. It should be the same file because it's quite huge here. So what I would do is, if I wanted to answer this question, is I would download the report from 2015. Is it? Simple. I would come here and I would say, I'm going to download the report, the annual report from 2022. It's not here, but maybe I'll say 2021, and compare it with the report from 2015. Right? I'll open this up once it's done downloading. But the idea is, if I wanted to use secondary data here, is to answer this question is, I'll ascertain the data needs, is it? The variables, you know, that I've identified insofar as my research is concerned here. You know, so I'll ascertain the data needs, the variables, and the format, right? And then stage number 2 is I need to identify where the data is going to come from. In this particular case, I guess I was quickly putting together these slides, and I'm like, this information can be extracted from the Zambia Statistical Agency website, but you would actually be getting it from the ZICTA website, right? And so as you are sourcing for the data, it's first identifying the entity that may have collected that sort of data. This is part of the research process, right? Maybe you're online, or maybe you speak to people from government departments and say, I'm looking for this type of data. What reports are more likely to contain the data that I want, right? So that you are setting the specific documents and you discover, well, I can actually make use of the ZICTA annual reports, right? Okay, so you source the data and then you evaluate the suitability and quality of the data, right? You know, so you look at aspects like the coverage, right? You know, for instance, does the data include, because I'm interested in the adoption of ICTs in Zambian households, so all across Zambia, so I'll be looking at, does the data that is available, does it include information from all the 10 provinces, for instance? You know, do they distinguish between urban, rural areas and peri-urban areas, for instance, right? That's coverage. And then the measurement validity, you know, how exactly is ZAMSTATS in this particular case defining internet access? Is it consistent with what I'm looking at answering in my research question? Maybe your focus would be on accessing the internet, but what is captured in the report is a combination of the internet and WhatsApp and all those things, right? Although WhatsApp is part of the internet, I don't know. This is almost done. I would want to see this. I would want you guys to see this report. At your own time, you may be interested in looking this up, by the way, you guys. You may be interested in looking up this information. I've just shared it in the income messages. I guess, I don't know where it was. Is it here? Anyway, I know it's in my downloads folder also. So I'm just going to go up here so that you see how detailed this report is, which it is also. This is 204 pages, right? 204 pages, wow. It's a very rich report. When they'll tell you that the mobile penetration rate in Zambia is 90% or something, they conduct surveys, huh? They conduct research to answer these questions. You probably want to read up on the methodology. You know, again, the way they create some of these reports, a lot of graphics. How can you have a PDF file that is 7 megabytes in size, right? I don't know what's happening here, but I wanted to showcase here. Yeah, there we go. There's penetration, right? You know, but where? These are developing countries. I wanted to see Zambia. Yeah, mobile money, right? This is how they conduct studies here. Look at this. They're telling you that in terms of the volumes, right, of transactions. Wow. Ooh. Have you noticed a change here? Volumes of transactions in terms of monetary terms. Huh? Goodness gracious me. Look at this. In 2018, in Zambia, it was I think it was like a total of 22 trillion, right? Kwacha. I guess total amount of transactions via mobile money, 22 trillion. 2019, 49, sorry, not trillion. This is billion, sorry. Yeah, billion, not trillion, because million, billion is, yeah. So 22 billion, 49 billion, 105 billion, and in 2021, 169 billion, right? So you'll be studying these trends or something like that. Anyway, it's a really nice report. You probably want to, I would look at it if I were you. I don't know, but I'm not you. Also, so measurement validity, right? Reliability as well, right? So it's like you're asking yourself, is ICTA a reliable source of data? Yes, I know. The naysayers would be like, no, because it's government who is compiling these reports, they have a vested interest. You guys, did you hear the story about census? Huh? That's where reliability comes in for secondary data, right? There were people that were saying the things that were reported in census, Zambia census issues or something. I don't know if it's Zambia. There were people that were talking a lot about, no, the data that was compiled here is not accurate. They're saying the population in this, yeah, if you see this, right? So be careful here, right? You know, just because it's government, sometimes you'd be like, maybe we can't trust what government is doing or something like that. I don't know. I would trust government myself wholeheartedly, actually. These are technocrats, right? Maybe because I find myself interacting with very smart people that work for these government wings, right? And typically when you're collecting data, like as part of census, it's literally not government. They'll pull people from academia to actively participate. People that do population studies, right, will be a part of a group of researchers that are, you know, brainstorming on how data is going to be collected or something. Anyways, so the reliability as well, you look at cost versus benefit. Is the data free, you know, or, you know, the cost associated with finding it and cleaning it, right? In case you want to reformat it or something. You know, only after this evaluation should you be confident to use the secondary data, in other words. So what we're trying to say is if you decide to use secondary data as a measurement instrument, existing reports, I don't know what that is. What you would do is you would say, you would have to conduct a thorough evaluation by looking at the coverage, measurement validity, reliability, right? And then afterwards, you can proceed, right? And use your secondary data or something. Just to tie the different pieces together here, what we're saying is secondary data is pre-existing data, and the instrument you're using here is a process, right, of finding and evaluating it. It offers a range of advantages. You don't have to invest in a lot of money for you to collect this data because it was just collected on your behalf. You gain access to it in a short space of time, right? If you think about it. You know, always follow this systematic process where you ascertain, you identify the source, you evaluate, right? It's important that you critically assess the suitability of the data before you begin your analysis. Listen, tomorrow when we meet at 18 hours in person, we're going to briefly talk about these other remaining. In fact, maybe we can do this just to wrap it up, right? Besides secondary data, you can also collect data using workshops. So you bring together different people in one group, right? Let's say I'm interested in understanding how CEOs manage people in the corporate world in Zambia. A nice way of doing that is, aside from interviewing them individually, is you say, we're going to organize a workshop at Intercontinental because these CEOs like fancy things or something, right? Fancy places. We invite them there for a breakfast, right? You bring them together and you set up this workshop in such a way that the questions, the discussions there will allow you to collect that data, right? So it's a workshop. You're bringing together multiple stakeholders in one venue, right? Not really, we're going to spend a lot of time here. It's one of those less widely used approaches here, but typically what you do is you organize these workshops or you facilitate them in such a way that you form breakaway sessions. We were doing this at the AI workshop last week. We had people from ZRA, Mopani, you know, Zambia, National Health Research Authority of Zambia, you know, Zambia Meteorological Agency and all that. And so what we did at some point is we split them into breakaway groups, right? to discuss pertinent issues about AI. Anyways, you know, when you're doing this, always plan an agenda, you know, you pre-allocate team roles. The way you organize workshops is you need to identify who's going to be taking note of important things. Typically, you'd also use flip charts, right? Where these breakaway groups will write down important things. You give them a question or a scenario, and then they discuss it in their group. It's always important to enforce the scope. You know, people will veer off course normally, right? So you always want to do that. Yeah, always pay particular attention to discussion times and all that. I thought I would include an example of workshops that we've conducted. We conducted this in 2018. If you notice a date to the right here at the bottom, December 5th to 7th, 2018. Together with the current head of department, we organized a nationwide workshop. And at some point, we had them form breakaway sessions, right? Breakaway groups discussing important issues. You know, so there's that. And then you can conduct focus group discussions as well. So this notion that instead of interviewing people individually, you can interview participants with related characteristics as a group. Imagine we want to collect data from lecturers at UNZA. You know, UNZA has more than 900 lecturers, and information you'd be collecting from these lecturers would in part be related to the school they're in, because schools have different departments, right? Now, if that's the case, right, you can't say, well, I'm going to interview at least one lecturer from each of the, or representing each department in each school. We have 13 schools. A typical school will have a range of departments, right? Look at natural and applied sciences, geography, chemistry, physics, computer science, mathematics, right? So already from School of Natural Sciences, it's like, I'm going to interview 5 people. School of Education, adult education, primary education, library information science, right? IPSE, right? A whole range of them, AUSE. So what do? You say, we're going to conduct focus group discussions. What we'll do is we will identify participants from representing each of the departments from each school, so that you will only have 13 focus group discussions for each of the 13 schools at the University of Zambia. You know, so quite appropriate when you're handling large user bases, right? You form focus group discussions here. Now, I want to leave you with this here, right? Because I'm preparing for another class, but also it's 1710. You notice that there's a broad spectrum of instruments that you can use, right? To collect data. Questionnaires, interviews, observations, secondary data, workshops, focus group discussions. Some of the things we haven't discussed, like ethnography, right? It becomes important for you to look at the research question that you have and identify the appropriate measurement instrument to use. More importantly, you also want to take into account your budget, right? The constraints. Do you have the time to conduct interviews? Do you have the money to drive around and follow people so that you go and interview them? Anyways, now that we know instruments that we can use to collect data, the next important question we're going to ask is, where do we collect this data from, right? As in, from which entities do we collect this data from? So we're going to have a discussion of sampling and sample sizes and all those things. So beginning tomorrow, we shall start looking at this. This is 1711. I'm going to leave you with that. Unless there's any questions, I think we can leave it at that. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, I guess, if there's any of that.